Elise Harrow expected Caleb Rowan to let go of her hand the moment the stranger opened the medical ledger. The whole room had gone quiet. Snow melted from the stranger's coat and darkened the pine floorboards beneath him. In his gloved hands was a bundle of old clinic papers, tied with faded red string. Elise stood beside the front pew with Caleb's handmade rawhide band still resting in her palm. A few minutes earlier he had offered it to her in front of half the town. Now, every eye in Ash Hollow had turned toward the one secret she had spent 6 years trying to bury. The stranger cleared his throat. "Elise Harrow," he said. "These records should never have been treated as the final word." Elise felt the room tilt. She looked at Caleb. He was not staring at the ledger. He was not weighing what the papers might give him. He was looking only at her. And then, before the stranger could say another word, Caleb reached for her hand. The story began months earlier, after a hard wind came down from the Laramie Range and tore a seam through Elise's fence. By sunrise, broken rails lay scattered across the yellow grass. Frost silvered the creek bank behind her cabin, and the sky over Wyoming had the pale blue color that came after a bitter night. Elise stood with a hammer tucked into her belt and a coil of wire hooked over one shoulder. She drove a cedar post into the frozen ground. Thump, thump, thump. The sound rolled across the empty draw. No one answered. That was how she preferred it. Her cabin sat where the sage thinned toward a narrow creek. It had one room, one stove, one shelf of patched dishes, and a roof she had repaired more times than she cared to count. It was not fine, but it was hers. Every board had passed through her hands. Every nail had cost her something. Every acre carried proof that she could live without asking a man, a neighbor, or a town committee to decide whether she deserved a place in the world. At 32, Elise knew how to set a splint on a colt, how to judge a storm from the smell of the wind, and how to make a sack of meal last longer than pride should allow. She trusted things that could be fixed: a broken latch, a split harness, a sick animal if she reached it soon enough. But some words did not feel fixable. 6 years earlier, a mountain fever had nearly taken her life. She still remembered the clinic in Rawlins, the sour smell of laudanum, the doctor's wet cuffs, the way he folded his spectacles before telling her what survived and what likely did not. "You may live a full life," he had said. Then came the pause that changed everything. "But children may not be part of it." That sentence became a lock. It closed around rooms she had not yet entered. It closed around dances, proposals, Sunday suppers, and the soft future people assumed belonged to every woman. So Elise learned not to want what she believed she could not have. She stopped sitting near young families in church, stopped letting older women arrange introductions, stopped looking too long at cradle quilts in the mercantile window. A person could survive a locked door, she told herself, so long as she stopped reaching for the handle. Near mid-morning, a rider appeared on the north road. Elise saw him before he saw her. A dark bay horse, well cared for. A man in a weathered brown coat sitting easy in the saddle with no wasted motion and no swagger. As he drew near the fence, he slowed. His gaze met hers. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. Nothing bold, nothing familiar, just a greeting offered from the proper side of the fence. Elise nodded once. The rider continued south and disappeared behind the cottonwoods. For reasons she did not care to examine, the draw felt less empty after he passed. By noon, Elise had set 3 new posts and cut her knuckles twice. She went inside to warm beans on the stove, then returned to hang a loose shutter beside the door. She was standing on an overturned crate when she heard the hoofbeats again, slower this time, closer. The same rider stopped at her gate and removed his hat. "Afternoon, Mom." His voice was low, steady, and careful. Elise climbed down. "Afternoon." The bay horse shifted its weight. Only then did she notice the animal favoring its left front leg. The rider followed her eyes. "He slipped coming through a stone wash. I don't think it's bad, but he's telling me enough to listen." That answer made Elise look at him again. Most men said a horse was fine until the horse proved otherwise. She approached the animal from the shoulder, palm open. The horse lowered its head as if he had already decided she was not a fool. Elise ran her hand down the leg, pressed gently, watched the muscle flinch. "Nothing broken," she said. "Stone bruise likely. He needs water and a quiet hour." The rider let out the smallest breath. "I was hoping you'd say that." Elise nodded toward the well. "Bucket's there." He waited half a second. "May I?" That was the first thing she noticed, he asked. Not as a performance, not as a joke. as if her gait, her well, and her answer all mattered. "Go on," she said. While the horse drank, Elise packed the hoof with a clay poultice and wrapped it with clean linen. The rider watched without hovering. "You doctor animals?" he asked. "I repair what men ride too hard and notice too late." A quiet laugh left him, not loud enough to flatter her, just real enough to be honest. When the bay finished drinking, the rider returned the bucket to the exact place he had found it. "Thank you, Miss Harrow," she said. He tipped his hat. Caleb Rowan. The name meant nothing to her then. It would later. For the next month, Caleb Rowan appeared in small ways that were too ordinary to accuse of purpose. He passed her place on the South Road and asked whether the washout near Morrow Bend had deepened. He left a bent horseshoe at her porch with a note asking if she could make use of the iron. He returned a wool scarf she had dropped near the feed store, folded clean and left on her gate latch. He never stepped where he had not been invited, never asked why she lived alone, never turned kindness into a debt, and because he never pushed, Elise's guard lowered in the smallest possible measurements. A word at the well, a nod in town, a shared look when the postmaster's mule refused to move, and the whole street pretended not to laugh. By late autumn, Caleb felt less like an intrusion and more like weather she had learned to trust. But Ash Hollow was not a place that let a woman keep peace for long. Silas Brand made sure of that. He owned 3 cattle outfits, half the grazing leases west of town, and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing no twice. When word spread that a freight spur might be cut through the South Draw, Silas rode to Elise's cabin in a black coat with silver buttons and a smile polished smooth from use. "I'll buy your place," he said, standing outside her gate as if patience were a favor. "It isn't for sale. You haven't heard my number." "I heard enough." His smile did not disappear. It tightened. A woman alone ought to think practical. Elise looked at the fence she had set herself, the barn she had roofed herself, the creek she had hauled from in winter and drought. "I do." Silas leaned closer to the gate. "Everybody sells eventually. Then you can ask everybody." He rode away with his jaw set hard. 3 days later, the whispers began. Not all at once. Whispers were cleverer than that. A conversation stopped when Elise entered the mercantile. A woman at church squeezed her arm too softly and said, "You poor thing," without explaining what sorrow she had been assigned. 2 men outside the livery lowered their voices when Caleb's name came up. Elise understood before anyone said it plainly. Silas had found the old clinic rumor. In Ash Hollow, a woman's body could become public property faster than land ever could. The first open wound came after Sunday service. Elise had stayed behind to gather her gloves. Near the door, Silas spoke to 3 ranchers and did not trouble himself to whisper. "Rowan's a fool if he's thinking serious," Silas said. "A man builds a home for heirs, not empty chairs." A few nervous chuckles followed. The church smelled of damp wool and cold ashes. Elise's fingers closed around her gloves until the leather creased. Then Caleb's voice cut through the room. "That's enough." Every head turned. Caleb stood near the back, hat in hand, face calm in a way that was more dangerous than anger. Silas gave a short laugh. "I was only speaking what people already know." "No," Caleb said. "You were speaking about a woman who wasn't standing in your conversation." The room went still. Even the pastor did not move. Silas looked at Elise, then back to Caleb. "Careful. You don't know what you're defending." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I know who I'm defending." Silas left first. The congregation followed in little embarrassed pieces, as if shame were something that could be carried out quietly. Outside, Caleb did not ask if Elise was all right. That would have broken her. Instead, he said, "Bridge plank north of the mill is loose. Take the east track with your wagon." Elise stared at him. He placed his hat on his head. "Thought you'd want to know." Then he rode away. That should have made things easier. It did not. Kindness was manageable when it remained small. Public loyalty was harder. It opened a room inside Elise she had spent years boarding shut, so she began avoiding him. When Caleb's horse came down the road, she went into the barn. When he paused at the gate, she pretended not to hear. When a sack of oats appeared beside her porch after a hard frost, she knew whose boot prints led away from it, and she hated herself for wanting to follow them. The trouble was not that she distrusted Caleb. The trouble was that she was beginning to believe him, and belief for Elise Harrow was the most frightening thing a person could offer. Then the blizzard came. It rolled off the mountains before dusk, hard and white, swallowing the road, the fences, the creek, and finally the distance between one life and another. Elise had just latched the barn when a shape staggered out of the snow, horse first, then rider. Caleb? The wind took his answer apart. She seized the bay's bridle and led both horse and man toward shelter. They got the animal inside the barn, rubbed him down, and crossed to the cabin bent against the storm. The door slammed shut behind them. Sudden quiet. Only the stove crackled. Caleb stood dripping snow onto her floorboards, his lashes white with ice. "You hurt?" "No." Horse insulted. Despite herself, Elise laughed. She poured coffee, and for a while they spoke of easy things. Fence wire, hay prices, a mare Caleb was training near Crow Creek. Every subject that could stand safely between them. The storm struck the walls again and again. The cabin seemed smaller with every gust. At last Caleb set down his cup. "You've been avoiding me," he said it gently. That made it worse. Elise stared into the stove. "I hoped I was better at it." "You're good at a lot of things," he said. "Not that." A laugh caught in her throat and went nowhere. For years her secret had been a locked box. Tonight, with the wind shaking the shutters and Caleb sitting close enough to see her hands tremble, Elise was tired of holding the lid shut. "I had fever 6 years ago," she said. Caleb did not move. "The doctor said I lived, but something in me likely didn't." The fire popped softly. Elise kept her eyes on the coals. "He said I probably couldn't bear children." The words were smaller than the room. Still, they filled it. "I have watched what that knowledge does to people," she continued. "I have seen men become polite strangers to wives they once swore they loved. I have seen women apologize for grief they never caused." Her voice thinned. "I will not make a man pretend not to be disappointed, and I will not sit across from him one day and watch him realize I was less than the life he wanted." Silence came down between them, long, heavy, familiar. Elise knew that silence. It was the sound before a door closed gently, so no one had to admit it was closing. She stood. "I'll warm more coffee." Her hands were cold as she reached for the pot. Behind her, Caleb said nothing. A minute passed, then another. When she turned, he was still there, not reaching for his coat, not choosing careful words at the door, just sitting by the stove, looking as if he had carried her sentence into himself and was finding where to place it. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know much about doctors." Elise braced herself. "I know they usually have reasons for what they say." He looked up. "But I also know I didn't ride back to your place because I was hunting for a cradle." The wind hit the cabin hard enough to rattle the tin cups. Caleb's voice stayed steady. "I came back because you notice pain before it becomes ruin. Because you mend things nobody else thinks are worth saving. Because you stand on your own ground like it was given to you by God and paid for with blood." Elise blinked against the heat behind her eyes. "And every time I rode away," he said, "I started looking for the next honest reason to return." She whispered, "Caleb, if there are children someday, by birth or by some other road, I'll be grateful." He leaned forward. "But I am not choosing a nursery. I am choosing you." The storm lasted all night. They did not speak much after that. Some words, once said truly, did not need help standing. Morning came white and quiet. Caleb shoveled a path to the barn while Elise broke ice from the trough. They worked side by side, saying little, the way people do when something fragile has become real. At the gate before he left, Caleb looked back. "Elise," she raised her eyes. "I meant every word." Then he rode into the bright snow. After that, avoiding him became impossible. Not because Caleb pressed. He never pressed, but because hope had a way of entering through the smallest cracks, and the storm had broken too many boards loose. By January, the whole town could see it. Caleb walked beside Elise after church. Elise let him carry a feed sack to her wagon. He came by on clear evenings to mend rails or drink coffee on the porch, and sometimes the two of them sat in silence while the creek moved black under the ice. Silas Brand watched all of it with a sour expression. He had failed to buy her land. He had failed to shame her into leaving, so he tried one more time to make the town choose his version of her. It happened during the winter charity supper in the meetinghouse. Long tables ran beneath the windows, lamps burned low. Snow tapped softly against the glass. Women had brought pies and beans and bread. Men stood near the stove, thawing their hands and pretending not to gossip. Elise was helping clear plates when Silas lifted his voice from the center of the room. A man ought to think beyond moonlight and pretty eyes. The room quieted. Caleb turned. Silas smiled like a man placing a card he believed would win. A ranch needs a future, a name. Children to carry it, not a woman who comes with a locked door where a family ought to be. Elise felt every face turn. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it. There it was. The sentence she had carried alone, now laid out for public inspection. She reached for a plate and missed it. It clattered against the table. Caleb stepped forward, only one step. He looked at Elise first, not Silas, not the crowd, Elise. That look did what no defense could have done. It reminded her she was not standing alone inside the shame. Then Caleb faced Silas. "If Elise never has a child," he said, "I will not love her less." The meeting house did not breathe. Caleb's hand went into his coat. "I'll love her the same on the first morning and the last." He drew out a strip of braided rawhide, worked with tiny carved knots, and a small silver button from a broken bridle. Not a ring. Something made by hand. Something patient. Something that had taken time. A few people understood before the rest did. Caleb walked to Elise. His voice softened. "I don't have gold. Not enough worth offering." He held out the rawhide band. "But I made this with my own hands, and I have been sure of it longer than I knew how to say." Elise could barely see him through tears. "Marry me, Elise Harrow." The answer rose in her chest. Yes, it was there, ready. But before she could speak, the meeting house door opened. A stranger stepped inside carrying a leather satchel dark with snow. "Miss Harrow?" Heads turned. The man removed his hat. He was young, pale from travel, with ink on one cuff and a doctor's bag in his left hand. "My name is Dr. Samuel Vale," he said. "I came from Rawlins." Elise's breath caught. The stranger looked at the crowd, then back at her with clear discomfort. "I apologize for interrupting, but this concerns your old medical file." He untied a packet of papers. "The physician who treated you during the fever died last spring. His old records were transferred to our office. When I reviewed yours, I found notes that troubled me." Elise could not move. Dr. Vale continued carefully. "The conclusion written in your file was based on fever damage suspected at the time, not confirmed. There were no later examinations, no proper follow-up." A murmur moved through the room. Silas's face changed. Caleb did not look at him. The doctor held the papers tighter. "I cannot promise what is true now, but I can say this. You were told a possibility as though it were a verdict." Elise stared at the pages. 6 years of loneliness. 6 years of locked doors. 6 years of making herself smaller so disappointment would have less room to wound her, and now the key had arrived in a stranger's hand. But Caleb had reached for her before the key. That was the part that broke her. She looked down at the rawhide band in her palm, then at Caleb's hand warm around hers. His expression had not changed when the doctor spoke. Not brighter, not relieved, not newly convinced. He had chosen her before the papers gave anyone permission. Elise laughed once through tears. "Caleb Rowan," she said, his mouth curved. "That's me." Yes, the room erupted. Someone clapped. Someone else let out a shout. The pastor removed his spectacles and wiped his eyes as if the lamps had bothered him. Even those who had whispered for months seemed grateful to witness a better ending than the one they had helped fear. Silas Brand left before the singing started. For once, no one followed him with their eyes. Spring came slowly to Ash Hollow. Snow withdrew from the draws. The creek swelled with mountain water. New grass showed green along the fence line Caleb had helped repair. They married in April beneath a sky washed clean by rain. There were no silk ribbons, no grand carriage, no feast a person would remember for the cost of it. Elise wore a pale blue dress she had altered by lamplight. Caleb wore his best coat and the look of a man trying not to cry in front of a church full of witnesses. On her wrist, instead of gold, Elise wore the rawhide band. The doctor examined her later that month. His answer was still cautious. "Possible," he said. "Not certain." Elise folded the word carefully and put it away. She had learned the danger of building a whole life on a single sentence. Marriage did not turn their days into a painted storybook. It gave them more work, more boots by the door, more coffee to grind, more fence to mend, more reasons to laugh at the same trouble. Caleb learned that Elise sharpened knives better than he did. Elise learned that Caleb sang when he thought wind would cover him. He was wrong, often. They did not speak about children every day. They did not need to. If the door opened, they would walk through it. If it did not, they would still have a house. In late November, Sheriff Alden Pike rode out with a girl of 9 sitting stiffly behind him. Her name was Ruth. Her mother had died of lung fever near Sweetwater. Her father was gone already. No kin had been found willing or able to take her. The girl stood in Elise's yard with a canvas bag clutched in both hands, trying so fiercely not to cry that Elise felt her own heart twist. Elise knelt in front of her. "Have you eaten today?" Ruth shook her head. That was all. A bowl of stew found its way to the table. A quilt found its way around narrow shoulders. Caleb carried in wood without asking what had been decided. By Christmas, Ruth had a shelf for her things. By spring, she called Caleb Sir less often. By summer, she forgot to be afraid when she laughed. The adoption papers came later with county seals and signatures and a smudge of ink on Caleb's thumb. But paper only confirmed what the supper table had known for months. Ruth was theirs. Almost 2 years passed before Elise began waking sick in the mornings. At first she blamed the heat, then bad coffee, then the smell of bacon, which suddenly seemed like an insult. Caleb watched her over the rim of his cup. "You should see Dr. Vale. I am fine. You said that when you split your palm on a fence nail, it healed. After stitches." She tried to glare at him. It came out as a smile. Dr. Vale's office smelled of soap, ink, and dried lavender. Elise sat by the window while wagons rolled past outside, and Ruth waited on the boardwalk with Caleb, trying to pretend she was not worried. The examination took a long time. When Dr. Vale returned, he carried no ledger, only a small folded paper and an expression full of wonder. "Mrs. Rowan," he said softly. Elise rose too fast. He smiled. "I believe you are expecting." For a moment sound left the world, not because the child made her whole. That was not the miracle. The miracle was that she already knew she had been whole. Caleb had taught her that before any doctor corrected a page, before any cradle, before any promise. When Elise stepped outside, Caleb knew from her face before she spoke. Ruth looked between them, confused and frightened by all the silence. Then Elise opened her arms. Ruth ran into them first. Caleb came next, wrapping both of them carefully, as if joy were something that needed shelter. Years later, people in Ash Hollow still told the story wrong. They liked the easy version. The woman who was told she could not have children, then did. The doctor who found the mistake. The proposal interrupted by a stranger with old papers. Those things happened, but they were not the heart of it. The heart was a man returning a scarf no one else would have noticed. A hand staying steady in a room full of whispers. A proposal made before the ledger changed a single word. On summer evenings, Elise sometimes sat on the porch with Ruth reading beside her and a little boy asleep against her shoulder. Caleb would be near the gate, repairing something that probably could have waited until morning. The house was louder now. Messier. Better. Extra chairs gathered around the table because Elise remembered what loneliness felt like, and Caleb believed a road was meant to bring people home. When the sun fell behind the Laramie Range, the creek turned copper and the windows filled with warm light. Elise would touch the rawhide band on her wrist and think of all the years she had lived as though one doctor's sentence had locked her future forever. The lock had been wrong. His love had never waited for the key.